I wasn't looking for trouble, but trouble has a way of finding you when you're bored. Finals were over, the campus was mostly empty, and my roommate Sam had gone out for the night, leaving the dorm eerily quiet. With nothing to do, I resorted to my usual late-night rabbit hole, scrolling through conspiracy forums and urban legend threads. It's the kind of pastime that's fun until it's not, leaving you glancing over your shoulder at shadows that aren't really there. That's when I stumbled upon a thread titled, "The Real Deep Web, You're Not Ready." Most of it was typical junk, rumors about red rooms, illegal marketplaces, and cryptic websites promising impossible knowledge. But one comment stood out. If you think you've seen everything, try Umbra Vault. It's not just a marketplace. It's something else. I should have stopped there. Closed the browser and gone to bed. But instead, I clicked the link. The instructions were straightforward, a string of random-looking characters to paste into a Tor browser. Moments later, the site loaded. It was unsettlingly minimalist, a black background with crimson text that read, "Welcome to Umbra Vault, the Bazaar of the Forbidden." There were no flashy graphics, no ads, just a list of categories: cursed artifacts, summoning implements, mystery boxes, and otherworldly communications. My heart raced as I stared at the screen, a mix of curiosity and dread pulling me forward. I clicked on mystery boxes. The listings were bizarre. Some offered vague descriptions, like, contains an item that will connect you to the beyond. Others made bold claims, unlock infinite knowledge, at your own risk. But one in particular caught my eye. Mystery box, contains a cursed item guaranteed to change your life forever. No refunds. The photo was simple, a plain cardboard box tied with twine. The seller's username was Null Agent, and their bio read, "You'll regret it." I hesitated. It was a scam, obviously. A way to dupe idiots out of their money. But there was a small, insistent voice in my head that whispered, what if it's real? What if this box held something unexplainable? The price was $250. Stupid money for a broke college student, but I wasn't thinking rationally. I told myself it was an experiment, a story to tell later when it turned out to be fake. With a few clicks, I transferred the Bitcoin and placed the order. 2 days later, the package arrived. Jordan, the RA, handed it to me with a skeptical look. "This thing reeks, man. What's in it?" "No idea," I muttered, grabbing the box and heading upstairs before he could ask more questions. When I got back to the room, Sam was sprawled on his bed with his headphones in, scrolling through his phone. He glanced up as I set the box on my desk. "What's that?" he asked, pulling out an earbud. "Something I ordered." He raised an eyebrow. "Since when do you order anything that isn't pizza?" "It's for a project," I lied, cutting the twine. The box felt heavier than it should have, and the sour smell Jordan mentioned was stronger now. The cardboard flaps creaked as I opened the box, revealing layers of yellowed newspaper. Carefully, I pulled them aside. Inside was a porcelain doll. It was about 8 inches tall, dressed in a tattered black gown. Its face was pale and cracked, with hollow black eyes that seemed too deep, too lifelike. Its tiny hands clutched a rolled-up piece of parchment tied with a fraying red ribbon. Sam laughed. "You bought that?" "Dude, it looks like something from a garage sale." "It's supposed to be cursed," I said, unrolling the parchment. The message was scrawled in jagged, frantic handwriting. "Speak not her name. Keep her in sight. Her vengeance is swift." A chill ran through me as I read the words. It was stupid, obviously a joke, but I couldn't deny the unease creeping up my spine. The doll's hollow eyes seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Sam leaned over my shoulder. "That's it. You paid $250 for this." "Shut up," I muttered, placing the doll on the desk. I told myself the unease was just my mind playing tricks on me. It was just an old doll, a cheap prop meant to scare people. But as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that the doll was watching me. That night, I had the first dream. I was back in my dorm room, but it wasn't the same. The walls were darker, almost pulsing like they were alive. The air was thick and cold, and I could hear whispers, soft at first, then louder, coming from everywhere and nowhere. In the middle of the room stood the doll. Its hollow eyes glowed faintly, and its cracked face seemed to move, the fractures widening into a twisted, grinning mouth. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The whispers turned into a deafening roar, a single voice repeating over and over. She sees you. She sees you. She sees you. I woke up drenched in sweat, the faint smell of mildew clinging to the air. The doll was still on my desk, exactly where I had left it. But its head was turned slightly to the left, facing me. I was sure I hadn't left it like that. The morning after the dream, I woke up feeling like something had crawled into my chest and stayed there, heavy, cold, and suffocating. Sunlight streamed through the dorm's thin curtains, but it didn't feel warm or comforting. Instead, it seemed to sharpen the shadows in the corners, making them darker, deeper. My head pounded, the remnants of the nightmare clinging to me like cobwebs. Sam was already awake, sitting on his bed scrolling through his phone, one earbud dangling lazily against his hoodie. He glanced up when he noticed I was awake. "Man, you look like crap," he said. "Bad dream or something?" I didn't answer immediately, my eyes flicking to the doll on my desk. It sat there exactly as I'd left it, or at least I thought it had. Its head was tilted slightly to the side, more than I remembered. Those hollow black eyes stared straight at me, their weight pressing against my chest. "Something like that," I muttered, rubbing the back of my neck. I wasn't about to tell Sam what had happened. He'd laugh it off, call me paranoid, and I wasn't sure I'd be able to handle his dismissal. Sam yawned and stretched. "Well, I'm heading to class. Don't let your spooky doll kill you while I'm gone." He chuckled as he grabbed his backpack and left, letting the door slam shut behind him. I was alone with her. The room was suffocatingly quiet. I sat on my bed, staring at the doll, trying to rationalize the sense of dread crawling up my spine. It was just an object, a stupid, overpriced trinket from a shady website. Nothing about it should have been able to affect me like this. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that those hollow eyes were watching me. I forced myself to stand and approach it. The closer I got, the stronger the smell of mildew became, sharp and damp like rotting wood. When I finally reached out to pick it up, the porcelain was colder than I expected, almost icy. Its cracked face felt unnervingly smooth, like something that had been polished too much. I turned it over, inspecting it for anything unusual. And that's when I saw it. On the back of its neck, hidden beneath the matted black hair, was a word etched into the porcelain. Married. The etching was crude, almost like it had been scratched into the doll by hand. My stomach churned as I stared at the word. I didn't recognize it, but it felt important, significant in a way I couldn't explain. I spent the rest of the day obsessing over it. Every search I did led me deeper into a rabbit hole of strange forums and websites. The word married appeared in fragments of legends and folklore, always tied to something dark and vengeful. In Islamic mythology, marids were a type of jinn, powerful, capricious, and nearly impossible to control. But the stories I found weren't just about jinn. There were accounts of cursed objects, haunted artifacts that carried the essence of a marid. They were said to be tied to vengeance, feeding on fear and guilt, manifesting their power through those who dared to name them. One line in particular sent a chill down my spine: "Once her name is known, she cannot be ignored." I slammed my laptop shut, my heart pounding. The dream from the night before replayed in my mind, the whispers, the way her hollow eyes glowed. Had I called her name in the dream? Was that enough? I shook my head. This was ridiculous. I was letting my imagination get the best of me. Still, the doll's presence felt oppressive, like it was sucking the air out of the room. I decided to lock it in the closet. Out of sight, out of mind. That night, I dreamed again. I was standing in the middle of a forest. The air was damp and heavy, the trees twisted and gnarled, their branches clawing at the dark sky. The smell of mildew was everywhere, clinging to the back of my throat. I could hear something in the distance, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like porcelain on stone. The sound grew louder, closer. I turned, and there she was. The doll stood at the edge of the clearing, but she wasn't small anymore. She was human-sized, her black dress tattered and swaying in an invisible breeze. Her hollow eyes glowed faintly, and the cracks in her face widened as she tilted her head, her porcelain lips pulling into a jagged grin. "Why did you call me?" she asked, her voice a raspy whisper that echoed through the trees. I didn't. I shouted, backing away. She stepped closer, the tapping growing louder with every movement. You spoke my name. You brought me here. The ground beneath me began to crack, blackened roots curling up from the soil and wrapping around my ankles. I tried to pull free, but the more I struggled, the tighter they held. Wait! I screamed. I didn't mean to. Her porcelain hand shot out, gripping my face with inhuman strength. You will pay, she hissed. Everything went black. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. The dorm room felt unfamiliar, the shadows too deep, the air too cold. Then my eyes landed on the desk, and my blood ran cold. The doll was sitting there, but now its head was turned fully toward me, tilted at an unnatural angle. The parchment lay open next to it, the writing darker, more pronounced than before. A new line had been added beneath the original warning. You spoke her name. She is coming. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I hadn't spoken her name, had I? Not out loud, anyway. But the dream, could that have counted? I didn't know what to do. I couldn't move, couldn't tear my eyes away from the doll. The room was silent, but in the back of my mind, I could still hear the faint tapping of porcelain on stone. And then, just as I thought I might be imagining it, the doll's head twitched. Only slightly, just enough to confirm what I already knew. She was alive. And she wasn't going to stop. A loud knock at the door shattered the silence, making me jump. It wasn't Sam, he never knocked. My heart raced as I crossed the room, glancing nervously at the doll before opening the door. It was Jordan, the RA, his face pale and tense. Hey, you all right? Someone reported screaming from this room. I stammered, no, must have been the TV. His eyes flicked past me, landing on the doll. He shuddered visibly. That thing, it's creepy as hell. Maybe get rid of it. I nodded mutely. As soon as he left, I turned back to the doll. It hadn't moved, but the oppressive weight in the room had grown thicker, suffocating. Then, with a sickening creak, the desk lamp flickered and shattered, plunging the room into darkness. Panic clawed at my throat as I fumbled for my phone's flashlight. When the beam finally cut through the gloom, I froze. The doll was no longer on the desk. It was standing upright, inches from my bed, its hollow eyes glaring straight at me. My scream echoed through the dorm as I scrambled to the door, yanking it open to flee into the hallway. But as I looked back, the last thing I saw before slamming the door was the doll's cracked face, now split into a grotesque, toothy grin. I had no idea what I had unleashed. And I knew, deep in my bones, that it was only the beginning. I didn't return to my room that night. Instead, I spent the dark hours in the dorm lounge, surrounded by the faint hum of vending machines and the artificial light that felt like my last line of defense. Every creak of the old building made my heart race. I couldn't stop replaying the image of the doll standing inches from my bed, its cracked face frozen in that ghastly grin. Morning came too slowly. When Sam finally wandered into the lounge, bleary-eyed and clutching a mug of coffee, his first words were a sarcastic drawl. What happened to you? Camp out here all night. I hesitated, then nodded. Couldn't sleep. He laughed, oblivious. Well, hope your spooky doll didn't keep you up. The mention of the doll sent a shiver down my spine. I decided then that I needed to tell him, at least part of the truth. Sam, something's not right with that thing. His grin faded. What do you mean? It's not just creepy. It's doing things. Moving. I think it's alive. He stared at me, then let out a short, incredulous laugh. You're serious? Dead serious. Sam set his coffee down, his expression shifting from amusement to concern. All right, let's go check it out. Maybe you're just overtired. I didn't want to go back to the room, but I couldn't leave him to face it alone. Together, we walked down the hallway, the sunlight streaming through the windows doing little to calm my nerves. When we reached the room, I hesitated before unlocking the door. My hand trembled as I pushed it open. The doll was back on the desk, sitting perfectly still, its head tilted slightly to the side. It looked harmless, almost ordinary, but I knew better. See? Sam said. It's just a doll. Maybe you were dreaming. I'm not imagining this, I insisted. I swear, it moved last night. Sam sighed, walking over to the desk. Fine, let's prove it. He grabbed the doll, holding it up like a prize. See? Just porcelain and paint. Nothing to. The door slammed shut behind me with a force that made the walls shake. The sound echoed through the room, and the air grew colder, almost biting. Sam froze, the doll still in his hands. What the hell was that? He whispered. Before I could answer, the lights flickered and died, plunging us into darkness. The oppressive weight returned, heavier this time, and with it came the sound, a rhythmic tapping, like tiny porcelain feet clicking against the floor. Sam, put it down, I pleaded. He didn't move. His breathing grew rapid, his eyes wide with fear as the tapping grew louder, closer. Then, without warning, the doll's head twisted sharply in his hands, its hollow eyes locking onto his. Sam screamed, dropping the doll as if it had burned him. It hit the floor with a sickening thud but didn't shatter. Instead, it landed upright, facing us. Its cracked face twisted into a grin that seemed impossibly wide. The whispers started, low and unintelligible at first, then louder, a cacophony of voices echoing through the room. She sees you. She sees you. She sees you. Sam bolted for the door, yanking it open. Come on, he yelled, but I couldn't move. My legs felt rooted to the spot as the doll began to rise, levitating off the ground. Its dress fluttered as if caught in an invisible breeze, and the whispers turned to a deafening roar. You brought her here, a voice boomed, not from the doll but from everywhere at once. You will pay. A sudden force threw me backward, slamming me into the wall. Pain exploded in my shoulder, and I struggled to stay conscious. Sam grabbed my arm, dragging me out of the room as the doll hovered, its hollow eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. We didn't stop running until we were outside, gasping for air under the harsh light of the morning sun. Sam turned to me, his face pale. What the hell is that thing? I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that we couldn't go back. Not until we found a way to end this. The doll wanted something, and it wasn't going to stop until it got it. Sam refused to leave me alone after what had happened. Neither of us spoke as we sat in his car, parked outside the campus library. The morning sun felt alien, too bright and indifferent to the horrors we had just escaped. My shoulder ached, and Sam's hands trembled as they gripped the steering wheel. We need to get rid of it, he said finally, his voice low and shaky. Whatever it is, we have to destroy it. It's not that simple, I replied, staring at my reflection in the side mirror. My face was pale, dark circles forming under my eyes. That thing, it's not just an object. It's alive. Then we find someone who knows how to deal with this crap, Sam snapped. A priest, a shaman, I don't care. We can't let it keep, whatever it's doing. He was right. Ignoring it wouldn't make it go away. But the thought of confronting the doll again made my stomach churn. We spent the day researching, combing through obscure forums and contacting anyone who claimed to know about cursed artifacts. Most were cranks or frauds, but one name kept coming up, Evelyn Harrow, a self-proclaimed occult expert who lived in the outskirts of town. By nightfall, we were standing outside her tiny, cluttered shop. The windows were covered with heavy curtains, and a wooden sign above the door read Mystic Emporium. Inside, the air smelled of incense and aged paper. Shelves were lined with jars of herbs, crystals, and strange trinkets. Evelyn herself was a small, sharp-eyed woman in her 60s, with gray hair tied back in a braid. She studied us silently as we explained the situation, her expression growing graver with every word. When we showed her a photo of the doll, she recoiled. You've brought a merit into your life, she said, her voice heavy with dread. A merit? Sam asked. She nodded. A powerful jinn. They're not bound by the same rules as other spirits. They feed on fear, guilt, and despair. Once you've named it, it's tethered to you. Destroying it isn't an option. Then what do we do? I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. Evelyn hesitated, then motioned us to follow her. She led us to a back room where an ancient-looking book lay open on a table. The pages were covered in faded symbols and text. There's a ritual, she said, to sever its connection to this world. But it's dangerous. The merit will resist. If you fail, it will grow stronger. Sam looked at me, his face pale. Do we have a choice? I shook my head. What do we need? Evelyn began listing items, candles, salt, and something personal to each of us. The ritual must be performed where the connection is strongest, she added. Back in your dorm room. The thought of returning there made my chest tighten, but there was no other way. Armed with Evelyn's instructions and the supplies she provided, we prepared ourselves for the night ahead. Back in the dorm room, the air felt heavier, colder. The doll sat on the desk, exactly where we had left it. Its hollow eyes seemed to follow us as we arranged the candles in a circle and poured a ring of salt around the room. Evelyn's voice played in my head, "Do not break the circle. No matter what happens." We began the ritual, chanting the incantation she had written for us. The room seemed to shift, the walls bending and warping as if the space itself were alive. The candles flickered violently, their flames stretching unnaturally high. Then came the whispers, louder and angrier than before. The doll began to move, its head twisting as it rose into the air. A shadowy form started to take shape around it, a towering figure with glowing eyes and claw-like hands. "Stay focused," I yelled, my voice barely audible over the growing roar. Sam's hands trembled as he held his item, a worn photograph of his family, in the center of the circle. The shadow lunged at the barrier of salt, sending a shockwave that snuffed out half the candles. I felt the heat of its rage, the weight of its presence pressing down on us. The urge to run was overwhelming, but I forced myself to keep chanting. The shadow's form began to distort, its movements erratic as our voices grew stronger. But then, it spoke, a guttural, inhuman voice that made my blood run cold. "You cannot banish me. I am bound to you." The room shook violently, and the salt circle began to break apart. Sam screamed as the shadow reached for him, its claw slicing through the air inches from his face. In a panic, he stumbled backward, knocking over a candle. "Sam, no!" I cried, but it was too late. The circle was broken. The shadow surged forward, engulfing the room in darkness. I felt its icy grip around my neck, lifting me off the ground. My vision blurred, the air forced from my lungs. But then, a sudden burst of light filled the room. Sam had reignited the fallen candle, his voice rising in a desperate chant. The shadow recoiled, its form fracturing as the ritual reached its climax. With a final, deafening roar, the shadow collapsed into the doll, which fell to the ground with a heavy thud. The room went silent. I lay on the floor, gasping for air, as Sam crawled over to me. "Is it over?" he whispered. The doll lay motionless, its eyes dark and empty. For the first time, it felt truly lifeless. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. The merit had been banished, but its presence lingered, a faint whisper at the edge of my mind. And it wasn't finished with me yet. The days that followed were strangely quiet. Sam and I avoided discussing what had happened, pretending that silence could erase the memories. The doll remained locked in a box, sealed with layers of salt and chains, hidden in the furthest corner of the campus storage room. But the whispers never stopped. They were faint, almost imperceptible at first, threading through the quiet moments of my day. In a crowded lecture hall or the bustling campus cafeteria, I would catch fragments of them, too soft to understand but impossible to ignore. I didn't tell Sam. He seemed lighter, more himself, and I couldn't burden him with my paranoia. One night, the whispers turned into dreams. I was back in the dorm room, the air thick with mildew and the smell of burning candles. The doll sat in the center of the room, its cracked face whole again, its hollow eyes brimming with malice. It didn't move, but the shadows around it swirled, forming shapes that loomed and twisted. A voice, low, guttural, and resonant, cut through the dark. "You thought it was over. You thought you could contain me." I woke with a start, my chest heaving, the taste of salt heavy on my tongue. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. The screen was dark, except for a single notification. One new message, null agent. My breath hitched. I hadn't heard that name since the night I bought the cursed box. My fingers trembled as I unlocked the phone. The message was short. "You broke the circle. Now she's free." I stared at the words, my mind racing. Free. The doll was locked away, surrounded by every precaution Evelyn had given us. It wasn't possible. But deep down, I knew it was true. The next morning, Sam didn't show up for class. When I texted him, there was no reply. His dorm room was locked, the lights off, and his phone went straight to voicemail. I told myself he was probably just sleeping off the stress, but unease coiled in my stomach. That night, I found myself standing outside the storage room. The air felt colder, heavier, as if the building itself was holding its breath. My flashlight cut through the gloom, the beam trembling as much as my hands. The box was gone. A sound came from the shadows, soft and rhythmic, the tapping of porcelain on concrete. My blood ran cold. Slowly, I turned, the flashlight sweeping across the room. In the corner, something moved. The beam caught it, a flash of pale porcelain and dark, matted hair. The doll stood upright, its head cocked to the side, its hollow eyes fixed on me. The chains that had bound it lay shattered at its feet. The whispers grew louder, swelling into a deafening roar. Before I could react, the lights flickered and died. The room plunged into darkness, and the shadows surged forward, cold and suffocating. I stumbled back, my heart pounding as the whispers resolved into a single, clear voice. You brought me here. Now, you belong to me. The next thing I knew, I was standing in the middle of campus, the morning sun warming my face. My heart raced as I looked around, disoriented. Students bustled past, laughing and chatting as if nothing had happened. I glanced at my watch. It was 8:33 a.m., a time I couldn't account for. When I got back to the dorm, Sam's room was empty. His belongings were gone, his bed neatly made. The RA said he'd withdrawn from school, no notice, no forwarding address. My calls went unanswered. It was as if he'd never existed. The doll, too, was nowhere to be found. I scoured the campus, every shadowed corner and forgotten room, but it had vanished. And yet, the whispers remained. Louder now. Closer. I could hear them in my dreams, feel them in the still moments of the day. The doll was gone, but she wasn't. And I realized then, with chilling clarity, that I hadn't escaped. I never would.